He kissed her on the lips to save her life, but she slapped him and shoved him away. "Hi, my very beautiful and most dearest family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. Let us pray together. Heavenly Father, with humble hearts, we come before you, seeking your grace and strength. Bless my beautiful family, each soul, each heart, each journey. Fill them with unshakable peace, endless joy, and the courage to rise above every storm. Let love surround them, hope uplift them, and faith guide them through every moment. Lord, walk beside us, hold us close, and remind us that we are never alone. Amen. My beautiful family, I must be honest with you. My heart feels heavy. The last 3 videos haven't done well because the likes and comments are low. It's a tough time. YouTube is pushing us down, but I refuse to give up because I have you. You are my strength, my light in the darkest moments. Please don't forget to like and comment on this video. Every like, every comment is a lifeline, a reminder that we stand together, no matter what. Let's begin with love. Rosa Parks was a force of nature, bold, beautiful, and completely unaware that David Love was hopelessly in love with her. She moved through Harbour Cove with a confidence that turned heads, her artistic talent making her a treasured community member despite having lived there just a few years. When she laughed, the sound carried like music on the sea breeze, and when she spoke about her art at local exhibitions, people naturally leaned in to listen. David was the kind of man who could command a boardroom with a single glance. Tall, powerful, and dangerously handsome, his deep blue eyes could make anyone weak except Rosa. She never seemed to notice how his gaze softened whenever she was near. The local business owner and environmental advocate had built a reputation for integrity and determination. Yet around Rosa, his usual composure crumbled into endearing awkwardness. The problem? David was terrible at expressing emotions. Behind his confident exterior lay a man who stumbled over words when matters of the heart were involved. He had tried to confess his love several times over the past months, but each attempt ended in disaster, leaving him more frustrated and Rosa none the wiser. Their first meeting had occurred at the Harbour Cove annual charity auction, where Rosa had donated one of her ocean paintings. David had been immediately captivated, not just by the artwork that somehow captured the very soul of the sea, but by the artist herself, as she passionately explained her inspiration to potential bidders. He had intended to introduce himself smoothly, perhaps engage her in conversation about her techniques, but instead knocked over a display of auction catalogues while approaching her. Rosa had helped him gather the scattered materials, their hands briefly touching over a glossy page. "I'm Rosa Parks," she'd said with a smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "David Love," he'd managed, amazed at how those simple words required such concentration in her presence. "Love? As in Love Marine Conservation Center?" she'd asked, recognition lighting her features. "I've been meaning to visit. I've heard the tide pools there are spectacular for sketching." "They are," he'd replied, suddenly regaining his ability to speak as the conversation turned to familiar territory. "I'd be happy to show you around sometime. The morning light creates extraordinary patterns on the water." She'd written her number on the back of an auction program, and David had carefully preserved that scrap of paper, transferring the digits to his phone, but keeping the original tucked in his wallet like a talisman. He'd called 3 days later, having deliberated over the perfect timing, and arranged to meet her at the center the following weekend. That morning tour had led to occasional coffee meetings, friendly encounters at community events, and a growing friendship that David cherished even as he longed for more. Their connection felt natural and easy when he wasn't overthinking it, when he could forget momentarily that his heart raced whenever she entered a room. The entire town seemed to notice his infatuation before Rosa did. Mrs. Henderson at the Flower Shop would wink knowingly when David purchased yellow daisies, Rosa's favorite, for the reception desk at the center. Thomas, his childhood friend and the town's harbour master, teased him mercilessly about his obvious attraction. Even Mr. Peterson, the taciturn hardware store owner, had gruffly advised him to speak up before someone else does when David lingered. Too long choosing the perfect shade of blue paint that Rosa had mentioned needing for a new seascape. But speaking up was precisely what David couldn't manage to do, at least not effectively. In business negotiations, his words flowed with precision and purpose. In community meetings, he articulated environmental concerns with passionate clarity. Yet in matters of the heart, particularly concerning Rosa Parks, eloquence abandoned him completely. As spring blossomed into early summer, David's feelings only intensified. He watched her from across the town square during the Founders' Day celebration, her face illuminated by lantern light as she helped children create paper boats to float in the fountain. The joy in her expression, the gentleness of her hands, as she guided small fingers through the folding process, made his heart ache with a longing so intense it felt almost physical. "You should just tell her," said a voice beside him, and David turned to find Thomas watching him with a mixture of amusement and sympathy. "Tell who what?" David replied automatically, though the flush creeping up his neck betrayed him. Thomas laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. "You're not fooling anyone except maybe her. The whole town has a betting pool on when you'll finally confess. Mrs. Wilson at the bakery has her money on the summer solstice festival. I thought Valentine's Day was a sure thing and lost $20. David sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to everyone with eyes," Thomas replied, his tone gentler. "She's special, David. Don't wait too long." That night, David made a decision. No more lingering glances or contrived coincidences. No more allowing fear to silence what his heart needed to express. It was time for honesty, for vulnerability, for taking the risk that came with opening his heart fully to the possibility of either acceptance or rejection. He would write her a letter, pouring out everything he felt but couldn't say aloud, and deliver it personally to her cottage by the sea. Surely written words would serve him better than his fumbling spoken ones. Little did he know that his journey to love would be lined with memorable mishaps and unexpected turns. The path to Rosa's heart would not be straight or simple, but rather a winding coastal road with surprising views around each bend. Much like the town they both loved, where the most beautiful destinations often required navigating a few obstacles along the way. As he sat at his desk that evening, watching the moonlight create a silver path across the dark water, David began to compose the first of several attempts to tell Rosa Parks that she had captured his heart completely, unwittingly, and irrevocably. Whether she would ever know the depth of his feelings remained to be seen, but he was finally ready to try, truly try, to show her. The first time David tried to confess his feelings, he wrote her a heartfelt letter, pouring his emotions onto paper. Sitting at his desk overlooking the moonlit cove, he carefully selected premium stationery, the kind reserved for important contracts and official documents. His fountain pen moved across the creamy paper with uncharacteristic fluidity, the words flowing easily when he didn't have to speak them aloud, when those deep blue eyes weren't watching him fumble. The gentle sounds of waves breaking against the shore below provided a soothing rhythm to his thoughts, and for once his emotions translated perfectly into words. "Dear Rosa," he wrote, "I've spent months trying to find the courage to tell you how I feel. Your presence in my life has been like watching the sun rise over the ocean, a daily miracle that never loses its wonder. When you laugh, the whole world seems brighter. When you speak, I find myself holding my breath, afraid to miss a single word. Your passion for life, for art, for this town we both love, inspires me to be better, to see beauty in places I once overlooked. The way you capture light in your paintings has taught me to look for illumination in everyday moments. I'm not asking for anything except the chance to show you how special you are, not just to everyone whose life you touch, but especially to me. I've never been good at expressing these things in person, but please know these words come from the deepest part of my heart. Yours, David. Reading over the letter, he felt a mixture of terror and relief. The words seemed inadequate compared to the depth of his feelings, but they were honest, and perhaps honesty was enough to begin with. He carefully folded the paper, slipped it into an envelope, and addressed it simply with Rosa's name. Tomorrow, he would deliver it personally to her cottage by the sea, the charming blue-shuttered bungalow at the end of Driftwood Lane. Morning brought fresh nervousness as David walked the coastal path to Rosa's home, the salt-laden breeze ruffling his meticulously combed hair. The envelope felt weighty in his pocket, as though the emotions contained within had physical mass. Small fishing boats dotted the harbor in the distance, their white sails bright against the blue water. As he approached the quaint cottage with its weathered blue shutters and climbing roses, doubt began to creep in. What if she didn't feel the same? What if his confession made their easy friendship awkward? What if she laughed at the earnestness of his words? His anxious thoughts were interrupted by the sight of Mr. Harold, Rosa's 70-something neighbor, struggling with an armload of firewood. The older man teetered precariously, his arthritis-gnarled hands unable to maintain a secure grip on the unwieldy logs. Without hesitation, David hurried to help, catching several logs before they tumbled to the ground. "Much obliged, young man," Harold wheezed, squinting up at him from beneath bushy white eyebrows, his weathered face, mapped with lines from decades of sea air and outdoor work, creased into a grateful smile. "You're that Love fellow, aren't you, the one who runs the town meetings?" "Yes, sir," David replied, stacking the wood neatly on Harold's porch. "David Love." Harold studied him with shrewd eyes that missed nothing despite his advanced age. "You're also the one who watches our Rosa like she hung the moon herself, if I'm not mistaken." Heat rose to David's face, the blush impossible to hide, given his fair complexion. I was just passing by," he mumbled, suddenly eager to escape the old man's perceptive gaze. Right, Harold chuckled, the sound like dry leaves rustling. "Well, since you're being so neighborly, would you mind dropping my mail at the post office on your way back? My arthritis is acting up something fierce today." Grateful for the distraction, David agreed, accepting a small bundle of envelopes. In his haste, he didn't notice his own letter to Rosa slipping in among Harold's mail. By the time he realized his mistake, standing frozen in horror at the post office counter, the letters were already handed over to the postmaster, bound for their various destinations. Later that same day, a summer shower drove the town's residents into the warmth of the harbor cafe. The quaint establishment, with its nautical decor and perpetual scent of fresh coffee and cinnamon, was the town's unofficial gathering place during inclement weather. David entered, shaking water from his coat, and froze in the doorway. There, in the center of the room, stood Mr. Harold, reading aloud from a familiar-looking piece of stationery to the assembled afternoon crowd. "Your laugh is like music that makes the world brighter," Harold read dramatically, his weathered face alight with mischief, one hand pressed to his heart in exaggerated sentiment. "Your spirit reminds me that life should be lived fully without reservation. When you speak, I find myself holding my breath, afraid to miss a single word." The cafe patrons hooted with laughter and appreciative sighs. Someone called out, "Harold, you old dog, who's your secret admirer?" "It's signed simply David," Harold announced, peering at the paper through reading glasses perched low on his nose. "But whoever this fellow is, he's got it bad for someone with eyes like the ocean at dawn, poetic, but hardly appropriate for a community notice." More laughter erupted. David stood paralyzed, horror and mortification washing over him in waves, stronger than those crashing against the shore outside. His eyes darted frantically around the room, landing with relief on Rosa, tucked away in a corner booth with headphones on, completely oblivious to the commotion as she sketched in her notebook, her brow furrowed in concentration. The entire cafe had heard his heartfelt confession, except the only person who was meant to. David slunk to the counter, ordering coffee he didn't want just to have something to do with his hands, wishing the floor would open and swallow him whole. The second time he tried to confess came several weeks later, when the embarrassment of the letter incident had somewhat faded, though not before Harold had taken to bowing dramatically whenever they passed each other in town. The annual Harbour Cove Summer Festival was in full swing, with colourful booths lining the town square, local musicians playing on a small stage, and children darting about with painted faces and sticky cotton candy fingers. This time, David had enlisted help. His sister, Sarah, had arranged for the local string quartet to play Rosa's favourite melody at precisely 4 o'clock, when Rosa would be passing the central fountain. The flower vendor had been generously compensated to present a bouquet of yellow daisies, Rosa's favourite. The baker from Sweet Temptations had prepared a box of chocolate-covered strawberries that David knew Rosa adored. Everything was set. David waited near the fountain, his heart pounding like the waves against the shore during a storm. When he spotted Rosa approaching, looking radiant in a sundress the colour of ripe peaches, he took a deep breath. The quartet began to play on. Cue. The flower vendor stepped forward. The baker appeared with the strawberries. Rosa stopped, clearly surprised as the vendors approached. David stepped forward from where he'd been waiting, his heart hammering wildly in his chest. "Rosa," he began, his voice mercifully steady, "I've wanted to tell you." But fate, it seemed, had other plans. A small Jack Russell Terrier, attracted by the scent of the strawberries, suddenly burst from the crowd and leaped straight at David. Startled, he staggered backward, the dog clinging to his jacket. In his panic, he flung his arms outward, sending the bouquet of daisies flying directly into the face of Mayor Harrington, who had been passing by to inspect the festival. The mayor, a stern woman with a reputation for decorum, stood stunned as yellow petals rained down around her. The string quartet screeched to an awkward halt, the crowd fell silent, and then the mayor sneezed, once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. "Who is responsible for this?" she demanded, her eyes watering and red. All fingers pointed to David, who stood mortified, the small dog now happily licking melted chocolate from his shoes. "Mr. Love," the mayor pronounced, dabbing at her nose with a handkerchief, "I find this display highly inappropriate for a community event. Consider this a formal warning against disruptive romantic gestures at town functions." As the crowd dispersed and the quartet packed away their instruments, Rosa approached David, concern in her eyes. She knelt to gently detach the dog from his shoe. "Are you all right?" she asked, returning the animal to its apologetic owner. "Fine," he managed, brushing flower petals from his clothes, his pride more wounded than his body. "Just clumsy, as usual." "I think it's sweet," she'd said, and for a moment hope flared in his chest until she added, "Whoever you were trying to impress must be special." He stared at her, dumbfounded. You think that wasn't for you?" Rosa laughed, the sound both beautiful and painful to his ears. "Why would it be for me, David? We're just friends, aren't we?" The word friends struck him like a physical blow. Before he could summon a response, Rosa's attention was drawn away by a colleague from the art center. She waved goodbye, leaving David alone with the scattered remains of his failed grand gesture. She didn't know. After all this time, all his awkward attempts and longing glances, she still didn't know how he felt. As David walked home along the darkening beach, the sound of festival music fading behind him, he wondered if perhaps it was better that way. Perhaps some feelings were meant to remain unspoken, like seashells buried beneath the sand, beautiful but hidden from view. He couldn't have known then that his third attempt would be the most memorable, and mortifying of all. But the worst disaster happened at the company picnic. The annual Harbor Cove solstice celebration at Blue Lake was a tradition dating back generations. Each year, as summer officially began, the entire town would gather at the picturesque lake nestled in the hills just beyond the shore. Families would spread blankets across the grassy banks, children would splash in the shallows, and the community would share food, music, and fellowship until the stars emerged in the twilight sky. For David, this year's celebration carried particular significance. After his previous failed attempts to express his feelings for Rosa, he had decided on a different approach. No grand gestures, no flowery letters, just honest conversation in a beautiful setting, perhaps in the magic of the solstice, with nature's beauty surrounding them. The right words would finally come. The morning of the celebration dawned clear and perfect, as if the weather itself approved of David's intentions. He packed his wicker basket with care. Fresh sourdough bread from the town bakery, local cheeses from the dairy farm, strawberries from his own garden, and a bottle of the white wine Rosa had once mentioned enjoying at a community dinner. As a final touch, he added a small wrapped package, a hand-carved wooden box containing a necklace with a sea glass pendant in the exact shade of blue-green that Rosa often wore. The gift wasn't meant as a declaration, but as a bridge, something meaningful but not overwhelming that might open the door to deeper conversation. For once, David felt calm about his plan. There was something about the simplicity of it that felt right. By midday, Blue Lake was alive with celebration. Colorful blankets dotted the grassy slopes, barbecue smoke wafted on the gentle breeze, and the local band played cheerful tunes from a small pavilion. Children raced around playing tag, their laughter mingling with the splash of swimmers in the clear waters. David arrived early to secure a perfect spot, a small rise beneath a weeping willow with a magnificent view of both the lake and the distant mountains. From here, the afternoon sun would cast golden light through the trees' graceful branches, creating a natural canopy of dappled light and shadow. He spread his blanket carefully, arranged the food with uncharacteristic attention to presentation, and settled in to wait. His heart leapt when he spotted Rosa making her way along the lakeshore. She wore a simple white sundress with embroidered wildflowers along the hem, and her hair was loosely braided over one shoulder. She carried nothing but a book and a straw hat, which she occasionally used to fan herself in the summer heat. Even from a distance, her presence changed the landscape, making everything around her seem more vibrant, more alive. David waved, trying to appear casual despite the sudden dryness in his mouth. To his delight, Rosa spotted him and changed direction, heading toward his hillside perch. "Mind if I join you?" she asked upon reaching his blanket, her smile as warm as the summer day. "You seem to have found the perfect spot." "Please do," David replied, gesturing to the space beside him. "I was hoping you might come by." Rosa settled gracefully onto the blanket, setting her book aside. "The collected poems of Pablo Neruda," David noted, recognizing the cover. "I didn't know you liked poetry." "There's a lot you don't know about me," she said lightly, but her eyes held his for a moment longer than usual, making his heart stutter. "For instance, you probably don't know that I'm absolutely famished, and whatever you've got in that basket smells divine." David laughed, grateful for her ability to ease any tension. He began unpacking the food, explaining each selection with perhaps more detail than necessary, but Rosa listened attentively, asking questions about the local farms and artisans who had produced each item. They ate and talked as the afternoon stretched lazily onward. David learned that Rosa had studied art in Paris for a year, that she had once hitchhiked across the southwest painting desert landscapes, that her favorite color wasn't blue, as he'd assumed, but the precise shade of green that appears in the ocean just as a wave begins to break. She told him about her childhood in a bustling city, and how she'd found peace in Harbour Cove after years of searching for a place that felt like home. In turn, David shared stories he rarely told anyone about following his father's footsteps into environmental law, only to discover his true passion lay in community development. About the year he'd spent building houses in coastal villages devastated by a hurricane. About his dream of establishing a marine education center for children in Harbour Cove. "That's beautiful, David," Rosa said when he described his vision for the center. "Children need to understand the ocean if they're going to protect it for future generations." Her genuine interest in his passions made the words flow easily. David found himself relaxing, the nervous energy that usually plagued him in Rosa's presence transforming into comfortable warmth. This, he thought, was better than any grand romantic gesture. This genuine connection, this sharing of minds and hearts. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the lake in shimmers of gold and amber, David reached for the wrapped package he'd tucked beneath the edge of the blanket. "I have something for you," he said softly. "It's not much, just I saw it and thought of you." Rosa looked surprised, but pleased as she accepted the gift. Her fingers worked carefully at the simple brown paper, revealing the wooden box carved, with tiny seashells along its edges. "Did you make this?" she asked, tracing the delicate patterns with a fingertip. David nodded, suddenly shy. "Open it." Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cotton, lay the sea glass pendant, a perfect teardrop of blue-green glass smoothed by years in the ocean, wrapped in thin silver wire and hanging from a delicate chain. "David," Rosa breathed, lifting the necklace. "It's absolutely beautiful. It reminded me of your paintings," he explained. "The way you capture the color of the water, that moment when blue becomes green. I found the glass on the beach last winter and kept it. When I finally decided what to do with it, it could only be for you." Rosa held the pendant up to the light, watching as the sun illuminated its translucent depths. "Would you?" she asked, turning her back to him and lifting her braid. With slightly trembling fingers, David fastened the clasp at the nape of her neck. The pendant settled perfectly against her skin, as if it had been waiting all along to find its place. There, when she turned back to him, her eyes held a softness he'd never seen before. "Thank you," she said simply. "No one has ever given me something so thoughtful." The moment hung between them, fragile and perfect. David could feel the words, rising in his throat, finally ready to be spoken. "Rosa, Let me get us something to drink," she interrupted suddenly, standing up. "I saw they were serving fresh lemonade at one of the booths. I'll be right back." Before he could protest, she was moving away, her white dress catching the late afternoon sunlight. David watched her go, half disappointed at the interrupted moment, half relieved to have a few more minutes to compose his thoughts. The path Rosa took followed the lake's edge, where the ground sloped gently toward the water. Recent summer rains had left parts of the bank soft and muddy, though most visitors stayed on the established paths. But Rosa, perhaps distracted by her thoughts, or simply taking a more direct route to the refreshment stands, ventured too close to the slippery edge. David saw the moment her foot slid, saw her arms windmill briefly as she tried to regain her balance, saw her expression change from surprise to alarm in the split second before she tumbled backward into the lake with a splash that seemed unnaturally loud in his ears. He was on his feet instantly, covering the distance between them in long, desperate strides. A collective gasp rose from nearby picnickers as David, without hesitation, dove into the water fully clothed. The lake, deceptively deep near the edges, due to recent dredging, closed over his head as he searched frantically for Rosa. His hands found her just seconds later, her white dress billowing around her in the clear water. With powerful strokes, he pulled them both to the surface and toward the shore. his arm locked securely around her waist. Onlookers had gathered at the water's edge, reaching out to help as David lifted Rosa's seemingly lifeless form onto the grassy bank. She wasn't breathing. Panic gripped him as he knelt beside her, water streaming from his clothes. He had taken a lifeguard course years ago, but the details came back in a rush of adrenaline, head tilt, airway check, 2 rescue breaths. With shaking hands, he gently tilted her head back and pressed his lips to hers, breathing life back into her. And that's when Rosa's eyes flew open, those beautiful eyes now wide with shock and confusion. Slap! The sound rang across the silent picnic ground, Rosa's hand leaving a stinging imprint on David's cheek. "What the hell are you doing, David?" Rosa gasped, shoving him away and sitting up. "I wasn't dying!" David blinked, droplets of lake water falling from his hair. "But you thought wrong." She wiped her lips, her face burning with embarrassment as she became aware of the crowd surrounding them. "You kissed me. I was trying to save you." A cough from someone in the gathered crowd, a muffled snicker. Someone whispered just loudly enough to be heard, "Well, that's one way to get a kiss." More laughter rippled through the onlookers, and Rosa's cheeks flamed brighter. She struggled to her feet, dignity clearly wounded more than any part of her body, and quickly walked away, leaving a trail of lake water in her wake. David remained kneeling on the shore, stunned and mortified. The crowd gradually dispersed, returning to their picnics with fresh gossip to share, leaving him alone with his soaked clothes and bruised pride. He watched Rosa's retreating figure, certain he had ruined everything with his misguided rescue attempt. But just before she disappeared into the throng of festival-goers, she glanced back over her shoulder, and in that brief look, just for a second, David saw something in her eyes. Something unspoken, something that made his heart race despite the disaster of the moment. Maybe, just maybe, the next time he kissed her, it wouldn't be an accident. After the disastrous kiss of life incident, Rosa couldn't stop thinking about David. At first, she told herself she was just annoyed at his clumsy ways, his awkward presence, and his deep blue eyes that always seemed to follow her. But the truth? Her heart had never raced like that before. For 3 weeks following the lakeside incident, Rosa actively avoided David. She took different routes to the farmer's market, skipped her usual Sunday morning ritual at the bookstore, and even changed her jogging path along the beach to avoid any chance encounters. But despite her best efforts to put the embarrassing moment behind her, Rosa couldn't stop replaying it in her mind. Not just the mortification of the attempted rescue, but the feeling of his lips against hers, however brief and misguided the contact had been. In the quiet of her cottage studio, surrounded by half-finished canvases and the scent of linseed oil, Rosa found herself distracted from her work. Seascapes that had always flowed effortlessly from her brush now seemed to morph into studies of deep blue, the exact shade of David's eyes. A collection commissioned for the town's new hotel remained frustratingly incomplete, lacking the spark of inspiration that had never failed her before. She found herself watching him from a distance when their paths inevitably crossed in Harbour Cove's limited public spaces. She noticed things she'd somehow overlooked before, how he always stopped to help Mrs. Wilson carry her groceries to her car, how he listened with genuine interest to the fishermen's concerns about changing tides, how he knelt to speak at eye level with children who approached him with questions or stories. Most of all, she noticed how his confident demeanor transformed into endearing awkwardness whenever he spotted her, even across a crowded room. She saw the way he would straighten his already impeccable posture, run a hand through his dark hair, adjust his collar, small, nervous gestures that spoke volumes once she began to recognize their significance. "You know he's in love with you, right?" her friend Lily asked one evening as they shared a bottle of wine on Rosa's porch, watching the sunset paint the harbor in gold and crimson. Rosa nearly choked on her drink. "What are you talking about?" Lily laughed, the sound tinged with disbelief. You can't be serious. David Love has been hopelessly in love with you since the moment you moved to town. Everyone knows it. The letter that old Harold read in the cafe? That was meant for you. The flowers and music at the festival? For you. The man has been trying to tell you for months. Rosa sat in stunned silence, pieces falling into place in her mind like a puzzle finally taking shape. The awkward encounters, the lingering glances, the thoughtful sea-glass pendant that she hadn't taken off since the day he gave it to her, all of it suddenly appeared in a new light. But he's David Love, she said weakly. His family practically built this town. He could have anyone, and he wants you, Lily replied simply. Though heaven knows why, when you're so oblivious to what's right in front of you. That night, Rosa couldn't sleep. She paced her small cottage, fingers absently touching the sea-glass pendant that hung around her neck, its weight now carrying new significance. If what Lily said was true, and the more Rosa thought about it, the more obvious it seemed, then David had been trying to express his feelings all this time, only to be met with misunderstanding, and most recently, a slap across the face. The realization made her examine her own feelings with new clarity. David had been a constant presence in her life since she'd moved to Harbour Cove, a reliable friend whose company she genuinely enjoyed. But was there something more? Had she been suppressing deeper feelings, perhaps out of fear or disbelief that someone like him could be interested in someone like her? As dawn broke over the ocean, painting the water in shades of pink and gold, Rosa made a decision. If David couldn't successfully confess his feelings, perhaps it was her turn to take action. One evening, as rain fell in gentle sheets outside, Rosa found herself standing outside David's small cottage by the sea, a bucket filled with water in her hands. The rain had soaked through her light jacket, plastering strands of dark hair to her face and neck. She hesitated only briefly before knocking, heart-pounding with a mixture of nervousness and determination. When he opened the door, his eyes widened in surprise. "Rosa!" Without a word, she entered, brushing past him into the warmth of his home. Water dripped from her clothes onto his polished hardwood floor, but neither of them paid any attention to it. David stood in his office, staring at the rain-streaked windows, when he heard her steps behind him. Rosa, dripping wet from the rain, holding a bucket before he could react. Splash! She threw water all over him, drenching his crisp white shirt and darkening it to transparency against his skin. "Now we're even," she said, arms crossed, trying to look stern despite the smile tugging at her lips. David blinked, stunned, water dripping from his chin onto his already soaked shirt. "I don't understand." "You stole a kiss from me in the water," Rosa smirked. "Now I've soaked you too." A slow smile spread across his face, lighting his eyes with a warmth that made her breath catch. "Are you saying I can kiss you now?" She rolled her eyes, but her heart fluttered. Not yet, but maybe soon. That soon turned into late-night conversations by his fireplace, the crackling flames casting dancing shadows across their faces, as they shared stories that had remained untold during their months of friendship. It transformed into walks along the moonlit beach, their footprints leaving parallel trails in the wet sand, occasionally merging when their hands brushed together, and finally intertwined. It devolved into moments where Rosa caught herself staring into his deep blue eyes longer than necessary, no longer troubled by the intensity she found there, but drawn to it like a ship to a lighthouse beacon. David still struggled to express himself properly, often starting sentences only to abandon them halfway through when emotion overwhelmed his eloquence. But Rosa finally saw the truth. His love for her had been there all along, in every fumbled word and awkward gesture. What she had mistaken for simple friendliness or professional courtesy had been a man trying desperately to convey the depth of his feelings. One night, as they sat on his porch swing, watching stars appear one by one in the deepening twilight, David tentatively took her hand in his. The simple contact sent warmth spiraling through her, a sensation both new and somehow familiar, as if her body had been waiting for this touch. "I've been trying to tell you something for a long time," he said softly, his voice carrying just above the rhythm of the waves on the nearby shore. Rosa turned to him, her eyes gentle in the fading light. "I know." "You do?" Relief and question mingled in those two simple words. She nodded, squeezing his hand. "You're terrible at hiding your feelings, David. You just needed to stop trying so hard." He laughed softly, the sound rich with affection and a hint of self-deprecation. "I thought it was obvious to everyone, except you. I've been in love with you since the first time I saw you standing on the beach at sunrise, painting the lighthouse, as if you were capturing some essential truth no one else could see." "Why didn't you just tell me?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "I tried," he said ruefully. "Letters that went astray, grand gestures that went wrong. It seemed the universe was conspiring against me ever expressing my feelings properly." Rosa smiled, reaching up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. Or maybe the universe was ensuring that when it finally happened, it would be perfect in its own way. And when he finally kissed her, properly this time, no pretense of rescue, it felt like coming home. His lips were gentle against hers, his hands cradling her face as if she were made of precious glass. Rosa felt something unfurl within her, a joy so pure it brought tears to her eyes. When they pulled apart, David rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for so long," he whispered. "It was worth the wait," she replied, and pulled him back to her, kissing him with all the passion she'd kept hidden, even from herself. The moon rose higher in the sky, casting silver light across the porch, where two people who had been circling each other for months finally found their way into each other's arms. And in that moment, all the mishaps and misunderstandings seemed not like obstacles that had kept them apart, but stepping stones that had led them inexorably toward each other. Spring melted into summer, and their love blossomed like the wildflowers that dotted the coastal hills. Rosa discovered that behind David's awkward exterior lay a thoughtful soul who noticed everything about her. How she took her tea, honey, no milk, which flowers made her smile, yellow daisies, the way she hummed when lost in thought. She found herself constantly surprised by his attention to detail, the way he observed and remembered the smallest aspects of her habits and preferences. 3 weeks into their relationship, David presented her with a custom-made palette knife that perfectly fit her hand's grip. "I noticed you struggling with your old one," he explained when she looked at him questioningly. "The handle was wearing down, and you kept adjusting your grip while working on that seascape last week." Such moments of thoughtfulness continually caught Rosa off guard. Her previous relationships had been with men who barely noticed when she changed her hairstyle, let alone the subtle tools of her trade. They spent their days exploring hidden coves along the shoreline, picnicking in meadows overlooking the sea, and sharing dreams under ancient oak trees. David knew every trail along the coast, having explored them since childhood, and took delight in showing Rosa secret tidal pools and hidden viewpoints that most tourists, and even many locals, never discovered. One particularly memorable afternoon, he blindfolded her and carefully guided her down a narrow path cut into the side of the coastal cliffs. When he finally removed the blindfold, Rosa gasped at the sight before her. A perfect crescent beach, enclosed by towering rock walls, accessible only during certain low tides and completely empty of other people. "My grandfather showed me this in place when I was 8, David said, watching her reaction with pleasure. "He called it Love's Landing, partially because of our family name, but mostly because he proposed to my grandmother here." Rosa turned to him, her heart swelling. "And you've never brought anyone else here?" David shook his head. "Never even told anyone else about it. This place has always been special to me, sacred almost, like you. At night, they would lie on the beach, counting stars and planning adventures they would take together. I want to show you Venice at sunrise, David would say, his fingers intertwined with hers as they gazed at the night sky. The light reflects off the water in the canals and makes the whole city glow like it's made of gold. And I want to take you to the lavender fields in Provence, Rosa would reply, nestling closer to his warmth. You've never seen a purple so vibrant it changes how you understand color itself. What about Tokyo during cherry blossom season? He suggested another night. I've heard the whole city turns pink and white like living inside a painting. And the northern lights in Iceland, she countered. Imagine painting those colors. They say photographs can't capture the way they move across the sky. Each dream shared was a promise of future adventures, a life mapped out in journeys they would take together, experiences they would collect like precious gems. They created rituals together, Sunday morning coffee on David's deck, where they would sit in comfortable silence as the town awakened around them. Wednesday evening walks along the pier, stopping to chat with fishermen bringing in their daily catch. Saturday visits to the farmers' market, where they would buy ingredients for elaborate dinners they prepared side by side in his kitchen, hips bumping, laughter flowing as freely as the wine they shared. You're surprisingly good at this, Rosa observed one evening, as David expertly filleted a fresh-caught fish. For someone who claims to be a disaster in the kitchen. I never said I was a disaster at everything in the kitchen, he corrected, with a grin. Just specific aspects of cooking, fire-related aspects primarily. As if to prove his point, the dish towel he'd left too close to the burner caught fire moments later, leading to a frantic dance of extinguishing that left them, both breathless with laughter and the smoke alarm blaring indignantly. David still had his moments of endearing clumsiness. Once, while trying to prepare a romantic dinner, he set off the smoke alarm and nearly burned down his kitchen, forgetting the candles he'd placed too close to the curtains. Another time, he planned a sunset boat ride that ended with both of them drenched when a sudden squall appeared from nowhere, capsizing their small craft within sight of shore. I swear the weather report said clear skies all day, he insisted as they squished their way back to his cottage, shoes waterlogged and clothes clinging to their skin. But Rosa loved these imperfect moments most of all. Perfect is boring, she told him, wringing seawater from her hair after the boat incident. I prefer our kind of romance, unpredictable and real. You might be the only woman in the world who finds near-drowning romantic, he replied with a laugh. Not the near-drowning part, she clarified, moving closer to slip her arms around his waist despite their sodden clothes. The part where you made sure I had the life jacket, even though there was only one. The part where you checked if I was okay before you even worried about the boat. The part where you can laugh about it now instead of being embarrassed. It was during these months that Rosa began to see beyond David's handsome exterior to the depths of his character, his patience, his integrity, his unwavering loyalty. She watched him spend hours helping Mr. Peterson repair the roof of the bait shop, refusing payment, even though the old man offered multiple times. She saw how children gravitated toward him, sensing his genuine interest in their stories and games. She witnessed his fierce protection of their town's natural resources, standing firm against developers who wanted to transform the pristine coastline into a resort complex. At a town meeting about the proposed development, David spoke with a clarity and passion that made even the most money-hungry investors pause. His deep voice carried through the community center without need of a microphone. His arguments logically structured and delivered with conviction rather than aggression. He was born to lead, Thomas whispered to Rosa as they watched from the audience. His father was the same way, could convince a cat to take a bath if he set his mind to it. Rosa smiled with pride, but what touched her most wasn't David's public persona, but what happened after the meeting. He spent an hour talking with an elderly couple worried about losing their ocean view, reassuring them and outlining specific legal protections they could pursue. He listened to their concerns with the same attention he gave to the mayor's opinions, treating their small problem with genuine care. And David discovered Rosa's hidden vulnerabilities beneath her confident facade, her fear of abandonment stemming from a childhood with parents who valued career over family, her doubts about being truly loved for herself rather than the vibrant personality she presented to the world. He learned that her art wasn't just a profession, but a necessity, a way of processing the world that was as essential to her as breathing. One stormy night, as thunder rumbled over the cove and rain lashed against the windows, Rosa confessed her deepest insecurity. "Sometimes I think my parents were right," she whispered into the darkness, her head resting on David's chest. "That art isn't a real career, that I'm just playing while the rest of the world works." David's arms tightened around her. "Your art touches people, Rosa. It changes how they see the world. How is that not real work?" "But is it important work?" she persisted. "My parents are surgeons. They save lives. What do my paintings do except look pretty on walls?" David was quiet for a moment, considering his response. "Do you remember Mrs. Wilson's granddaughter, the one who hasn't spoken since her parents died in that car accident?" When Rosa nodded, he continued, "Her therapist bought one of your ocean paintings for their sessions. Last week, for the first time in 2 years, that little girl spoke. She pointed at your painting and said, 'blue.' Just that one word, but it was the first sound she'd made voluntarily since the accident." Rosa propped herself up on one elbow, staring at him in the dim light. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Mrs. Wilson just told me yesterday, but that's what your art does, Rosa. It reaches places inside people that nothing else can touch. It heals in ways medicine can't. Don't ever think it's not important." They healed each other with honest words and gentle touches, with laughter and occasionally tears. Their love grew not despite the difficulties, but because of them, stronger for having weathered storms both literal and figurative. Their first significant argument happened 3 months into their relationship, over something that seemed trivial. At first, David's tendency to make decisions without consulting Rosa, even when those decisions affected them both. "You can't just assume I'll drop everything and attend your family's weekend retreat with 2 days' notice." Rosa had fumed, pacing his living room. "I had plans to finish that commission. It's due next week. But my mother expects you to be there," David countered, frustrated by her reaction. "Everyone's bringing their partners. It's tradition." "And you couldn't have mentioned this tradition a month ago, or even 2 weeks ago." The argument escalated, both of them expressing deeper frustrations that had been simmering beneath the surface. Rosa felt that David sometimes took her for granted, assuming her schedule could always accommodate his. David felt that Rosa didn't understand the obligations that came with being part of his family. They parted that night without resolving the issue, both hurt and angry. Rosa returned to her cottage alone for the first time in weeks, spending a restless night, wondering if they'd made a mistake in thinking they could build a life together when they came from such different worlds. The next morning, she opened her, endured to find David sitting on her porch steps, looking as if he hadn't slept at all. Before she could speak, he held up a hand. "You're right," he said simply. "I should have told you about the retreat earlier, and I should have asked if you wanted to go, not assumed. I'm sorry." The genuine remorse in his voice melted Rosa's lingering anger. She sat beside him on the steps, their shoulders touching. "I'm sorry too. I overreacted. Your family is important, and I want to be part of those traditions. Not at the expense of your work," David insisted. "I called my mother this morning and explained. She's rescheduled the retreat for next month, and she made me promise to give you proper notice in the future." Rosa stared at him in amazement. "Your mother rescheduled a whole family event because of my commission." David smiled, taking her hand. She said, and I quote, "It's about time someone reminded that boy that the world doesn't revolve around the love family schedule." Apparently my father used to do the same thing to her. They had laughed then, the tension dissolving, and later that day, David had arrived at Rosa's studio with coffee and a hand-drawn calendar of all known love family events for the next year, with "Important, Rosa has deadlines too" written across the top in bold letters. It was this willingness to grow, to admit mistakes, to adjust long-established patterns that convinced Rosa their relationship had staying power. David wasn't perfect, far from it, but he was perfectly committed to building something real with her, something that honored both their needs. "I never believed in soulmates," Rosa confessed one evening, as they sat on the cliffs watching another spectacular sunset, the sky ablaze with colors she knew she could never fully capture on canvas, though she would spend a lifetime trying. "I always thought it was something people invented to make sense of the chaos of human connection." David brushed a strand of hair from her face, tucking it behind her ear in a gesture that had become familiar and cherished. "And now?" She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the sunset's glow. "Now I think maybe they exist, but not in the way most people imagine. Not as perfect matches created by fate, but as two people who choose each other again and again, through storms and sunshine, through misunderstandings and revelations." "I'd choose you in any lifetime," David said, his voice carrying all the certainty of a man who had found his home. "In any universe, in any reality, my heart would recognize yours." Rosa leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Even if I slapped you again?" David laughed, the sound rumbling pleasantly beneath her ear. "Even then, though I'd prefer if that particular incident remained a one-time experience." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars began to pepper the night sky. The physical attraction between them had grown alongside their emotional connection, turning quiet moments like these into charged anticipation of the night to come. David's touch, initially hesitant, had grown confident as he learned what made Rosa sigh with pleasure, what caused her to arch against him in silent demand for more. Their nights together were a revelation, passionate, tender, sometimes playful, always profound. In David's arms, Rosa found a sanctuary where she could be fully herself, all pretenses stripped away. And David, who had spent a lifetime maintaining control, discovered the joy of surrender, of letting go completely in the safety of Rosa's embrace. As summer reached its peak, they became inseparable. The townsfolk who had watched their awkward courtship unfold now smiled knowingly when they passed by hand in hand. Mrs. Henderson saved the freshest daisies for David's weekly purchases. The cafe owner automatically prepared 2 cups when either of them entered alone, knowing the other wouldn't be far behind. "You two are good for each other," Thomas remarked one day when he and David were working on plans for the Marine Education Center. "I've never seen you so at peace." David smiled, unable to deny the observation. "She makes me better," he said simply. "She makes me more myself." It was a truth he carried with him each day, that loving Rosa hadn't changed who he was, but had revealed parts of himself he hadn't fully recognized. And as their love deepened, he began to contemplate a future where that truth could be acknowledged not just in private moments, but in a public declaration of commitment. The idea of proposing both thrilled and terrified him. Given his track record with romantic gestures, the potential for disaster seemed high, yet the certainty of his love for Rosa outweighed any fear of another embarrassing mishap. This time, he would make it perfect. He spent weeks planning, consulting with Thomas about timing, asking Rosa's best friend Lily about her preferences, researching the ideal location. He settled on a candlelit dinner at the Lighthouse, Harbour Cove's finest restaurant, followed by a moonlit walk through the beautifully landscaped harbour gardens, where they'd first begun to fall in love during their evening strolls. He left nothing to chance. A violinist would be positioned near the gazebo to play their song, La Vie en Rose, which had been playing the first time they danced together. Rose petals would mark the path to a gazebo adorned with fairy lights. And in his pocket would be the ring, a platinum band with a center diamond surrounded by smaller sapphires, the exact color of the ocean that had brought them together, a symbol of how their separate lives had merged into something more beautiful than either alone. The evening was planned down to the minute, but as David had learned repeatedly since meeting Rosa Parks, some of life's most important moments refused to follow even the most careful plans, and his proposal would prove to be no exception. When David finally decided to propose, he wanted it to be perfect, a candlelit dinner at the finest restaurant in town, followed by a moonlit walk through the gardens where they'd first begun to fall in love. A live violinist would play their song. Rose petals would mark the path to a gazebo where he would get down on one knee and present her with the stunning diamond ring he'd spent months saving for. The evening began flawlessly. Rosa looked breathtaking in a midnight blue dress that matched her eyes, the fabric flowing around her like water as she moved. The sea glass pendant he'd given her months ago at the lakeside picnic rested against her collarbone, catching the candlelight as they dined at the best table in the lighthouse restaurant, overlooking the harbour where boats gently rocked in their moorings. The dinner was exquisite, the conversation flowing easily between them, as it always did now. They shared memories of their early encounters, laughing at David's failed attempts to express his feelings and Rosa's obliviousness to what everyone else in town had seen so clearly. "I still can't believe you didn't know the letter was for you," David said, shaking his head. "I practically described you in verse." Rosa smiled, reaching across the table to take his hand. "In my defense, you never actually used my name. And you've seen my track record with men. I never imagined someone like you would be interested in someone like me." "Someone like me?" David raised an eyebrow. "You mean awkward and disaster-prone?" "I mean kind and brilliant and genuinely good," she corrected, her expression softening. "The sort of man who notices what kind of tea people drink and remembers their favorite flowers. The sort of man who carves tiny seashells on wooden boxes and finds the perfect piece of sea glass because it matches someone's paintings." David felt a flush of pleasure at her words. For someone who had spent years feeling tongue-tied around her, hearing Rosa articulate exactly what she valued in him was still a revelation. As they walked into the harbour gardens after dinner, the soft strains of violin music filled the air, a gentle rendition of La Vie en Rose that seemed to float among the carefully tended roses and jasmine. The garden paths were illuminated by small lanterns that created pools of golden light in the growing darkness, and the air was heavy with the scent of night-blooming flowers. "This is magical," Rosa whispered, squeezing his hand. David's heart hammered in his chest. This was it, the perfect moment. Everything he'd failed to do before would be redeemed by this one flawless proposal. The violinist, positioned discreetly behind a flowering arbor, nodded slightly to David as they passed, their prearranged signal that he would continue playing until the moment was complete. As they approached the gazebo, adorned with twinkling lights that resembled earthbound stars, David took a deep breath. He guided Rosa to the center, then carefully got down on one knee. The wooden floorboards of the gazebo were cool beneath his knee, solid and reassuring. "Rosa," he began, voice surprisingly steady despite the thunder of his pulse in his ears. "From the moment I met you, you've brought color and light into my world. Your spirit, your passion, your authenticity, everything about you makes me want to be a better man. I've tried to tell you how I feel so many times in so many ways, but somehow it never came out right." Rosa's eyes glistened with unshed tears. As she squeezed his hands encouragingly, David continued, emboldened by the love he saw reflected in her gaze. "But now I finally have the chance to ask you properly, with no mishaps or misunderstandings." But as soon as the words left his mouth, a stray dog, attracted by the delicious steak they'd had for dinner, lunged at him from the bushes surrounding the gazebo. It was Pippin, the same Jack Russell Terrier that had ruined his festival confession months ago, apparently escaped from his owner once again. David, startled by the sudden movement, yelped and lost his balance, falling backward into the ornamental fountain that centered the garden's main plaza. Cold water engulfed him, soaking his carefully selected suit and the velvet ring box in his pocket. The violinist hit a screeching wrong note, then stopped playing altogether, the abrupt silence more noticeable than the music had been. Rosa burst into laughter, the sound echoing through the night air. "Okay, that's it," David groaned from the water, his perfect moment ruined once again. "I give up. I've tried everything, Rosa. I love you, but I clearly wasn't meant to propose properly." Rosa, still laughing, walked up to the fountain, her eyes soft with tenderness beneath her mirth. She leaned down and whispered, "Then stop trying so hard, David." She reached into his soaked jacket pocket, pulled out the ring box and opened it. The diamond caught the moonlight, sparkling almost as brightly as the tears in her eyes as she saw the sapphire-surrounded stone. "Yes," she said simply. David froze, water dripping from his hair. What?" I said, "Yes, dummy." And then, right there, soaked, embarrassed and still on his knees in the fountain, David kissed her. This time, she didn't slap him. Instead, she wrapped her arms around his neck, not caring that her beautiful dress was getting wet as she leaned into the fountain to reach him. When they finally pulled apart, David looked at her in wonder. "You're saying yes even after I ruined the proposal?" Rosa smiled, touching his cheek gently. "I'm saying yes because you ruined it, because it's so perfectly us." The violinist, who had been watching the scene unfold, began to play again, a romantic melody that drifted through the night air. David stepped out of the fountain, water streaming from his clothes, and took Rosa in his arms. They danced beneath the stars, soaking wet and completely in love, oblivious to the small crowd of garden visitors who had gathered to witness their unusual engagement. "I had it all planned out," David said as they swayed to the music. "The perfect proposal, the perfect moment." "Perfect is overrated," Rosa replied, resting her head against his chest, despite the dampness. "I'd rather have real. I'd rather have you, exactly as you are, dog attacks, fountain falls and all." As they walked home hand in hand, leaving wet footprints along the garden path, they laughed about how they would tell their children someday about their engagement, how David had proposed from the bottom of a fountain, and how Rosa had fished the ring from his pocket before he could even finish asking the question. "Our love story may not be conventional," David mused, watching the ring glitter on Rosa's finger as she gestured animatedly. "But it's never boring. And I wouldn't have it any other way," Rosa replied, the diamond on her finger catching the moonlight as she reached up to kiss him once more. "Besides, consider this. If these are the disasters we survive while falling in love, imagine the stories we'll have after 50 years together." David laughed, pulling her close as they walked through the quiet streets of Harbour Cove. "Remind me to invest in extra insurance and waterproof everything," Rosa added with a grin. Back at David's cottage, as they stood dripping on the porch, Rosa took his face between her hands and looked at him with sudden seriousness. "You know why I love you, David love? Because even when everything goes wrong, you keep trying. You never give up on what matters to you." "And nothing matters to me more than you," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. They crossed the threshold together, leaving their wet shoes by the door, ready to begin the next chapter of their story, one they would write together, with all the beautiful imperfections that made their love uniquely theirs. The months leading up to their wedding were filled with joy and anticipation. They chose a small, intimate ceremony to be held on the beach where they had shared so many precious moments. Rosa selected a simple but elegant gown that flowed like water around her. "Something I can move in freely," she explained, "in case I need to rescue you from whatever disaster occurs during the ceremony." David, determined not to mess up his wedding day, rehearsed his vows religiously, practicing in front of the mirror until the words flowed naturally. Every evening, after finishing wedding preparations, they would walk along the shore as sunset painted the water in shades of gold and crimson. These quiet moments became a sanctuary amidst the whirlwind of planning, a reminder of what truly mattered beyond the details of flowers and guest lists. "Are you nervous?" Rosa asked one evening, her bare feet leaving imprints in the wet sand. "Beside his. About marrying you?" "Not for a second," David replied, squeezing her hand. "About making it through the ceremony without some catastrophe?" "Absolutely terrified." She laughed, the sound mingling with the crash of waves. "I've packed an emergency kit. Extra clothes, towels, bandages, and a fire extinguisher just in case." "You think of everything," he murmured, pulling her close for a kiss that tasted of salt air and certainty. Their families embraced the union wholeheartedly, with one exception. David's grandmother, a formidable woman with old-fashioned values and a spine made of steel, remained mysteriously quiet about the engagement. Eleanor Love was the family matriarch, a woman whose approval was as coveted as it was difficult to obtain. At 87, she had seen the small fishing village of Harbour Cove transform into a thriving coastal town, had weathered personal tragedies with dignity, and had strong opinions about everything from politics to the proper way to brew tea. She had been a constant presence in David's life since childhood, stepping in to help raise him after his mother returned to work. Her influence on him was profound. It was she who had first taken him to the tide pools that sparked his love of marine life, she who had taught him the value of community service, she who had impressed upon him the importance of the Love family legacy in Harbour Cove. Her approval meant everything to David, though he tried to pretend otherwise. She neither approved nor disapproved of Rosa explicitly, simply observing her with keen, assessing eyes whenever they visited the grand old Victorian house on the hill that had been in the Love family for generations. Her silence weighed heavily on both David and Rosa, creating the only shadow in their otherwise bright future together. "Don't worry about Grandma," David assured Rosa after a particularly tense Sunday dinner, where Eleanor had subjected Rosa to what felt like an interrogation about her family background and career prospects. "She's just protective. She'll come around." But Rosa wasn't convinced. Having grown up with parents who made their disapproval known through silence rather than confrontation, she recognized the tactic all too well. The older woman's reserve made her wonder if she would ever truly be accepted as David's wife, if she would always be viewed as somehow inadequate for the last scion of Harbour Cove's founding family. Despite this tension, wedding preparations continued. Harbour Cove embraced the upcoming nuptials with characteristic enthusiasm. The town had watched their romance unfold from David's earliest fumbling attempts at courting through their engagement. And now everyone wanted to contribute to their happy ending. Mrs. Henderson designed elaborate floral arrangements featuring Rosa's favorite yellow daisies mixed with sea lavender and native coastal blooms. The baker at Sweet Temptations created sample after sample of cake flavors for them to taste, finally settling on a lemon cake with raspberry filling that made Rosa close her eyes in bliss at first bite. Thomas, as best man, organized a bachelor party that miraculously didn't result in any emergencies or embarrassing incidents, though David did return home with a mysterious smile that he refused to explain despite Rosa's curious questioning. "Let's just say some traditions are worth keeping," he teased, kissing her forehead. "Nothing scandalous, I promise." Each evening, after a day of planning, they would retreat to their private world. Sometimes at David's cottage, sometimes at Rosa's studio, where they would lose themselves in each other, finding in their physical connection a reminder of what all the preparations were really about. "I can't wait to call you my wife," David whispered one night as they lay tangled in sheets, the moonlight casting silver patterns across their skin. "I can't wait to see you try to get through the ceremony without falling into the ocean." Rosa replied with a mischievous smile, yelping when he tickled her in retaliation. A week before the wedding, Rosa made a decision. Instead of waiting for approval that might never come, she would confront the situation directly. She visited the Love family home alone, bringing homemade cookies and a willingness to bridge the gap between them, however daunting the task might. Eleanor answered the door herself. Though Rosa knew there was household staff who could have done so, it was a power move, establishing from the first moment that this was her domain, her territory. "Mrs. Love," Rosa began, standing straight despite her nerves, "I thought we might talk." The older woman's eyes, the same deep blue as David's but considerably sharper, assessed her for a long moment before she stepped aside to allow Rosa entry. "I suppose we might," she conceded, leading the way to a formal sitting room filled with antiques and family photographs spanning generations. They sat across from each other, Rosa perched on the edge of a brocade chair, Eleanor settled regally on a love seat that had probably witnessed a century of family discussions. "I brought these for you," Rosa said, offering the container of cookies. "David mentioned you enjoy shortbread." "Did he?" Eleanor accepted the gift, but set it aside untasted. Her white hair was arranged in a perfect French twist, her posture impeccable despite her years. "You love my grandson?" she asked bluntly, skipping any pretense of small talk. "With all my heart," Rosa answered without hesitation, meeting the older woman's gaze directly, enough to put up with his disasters, his clumsiness, his terrible timing. Rosa smiled, thinking of all the mishaps they'd shared, from the misdirected love letter to the fountain proposal. "Those aren't flaws to me. They're part of who he is, part of why I love him. And his position in this community, the responsibilities that come with the Love name. Our family has been central to Harbour Cove for generations. We have obligations that may not align with the free-spirited life of an artist." Rosa felt a flare of defensiveness, but kept her voice measured. "I understand commitment and responsibility. Mrs. Love, I may express myself through art, but that doesn't mean I don't value tradition and community. I chose to make Harbour Cove my home long before David and I fell in love. I've put down roots here. Your parents live across the country. You have no family nearby. Children need stability, extended family. Our children will have that," Rosa replied, her cheeks warming at discussing children they hadn't yet had. "They'll have David's family here, and they'll know my family as well. More importantly, they'll have two parents who love each other, and them unconditionally. Isn't that the most important stability of all?" Eleanor studied her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she reached for a cookie and bit into it, her movements deliberate and controlled. "Good answer," she said finally, a small smile warming her stern features. "And excellent shortbread. You made these yourself?" "Yes," Rosa admitted, surprised by the sudden shift. "My grandmother's recipe." "Well, at least you can bake." Eleanor took another bite, her assessment seemingly extending from Rosa's character to her culinary skills. "David can burn water. Gets that from his grandfather." "Brilliant. Man hopeless in the kitchen." Rosa laughed, tension easing from her shoulders. "He did nearly set the curtains on fire trying to make me dinner." "That sounds like a love man." Eleanor's expression softened further. "My husband once caused a small explosion trying to surprise me with breakfast in bed for our anniversary. The ceiling in that kitchen was never the same," she sighed, setting down her half-eaten cookie. David is like him in many ways, earnest, well-intentioned, occasionally calamitous, but with a heart true as north. I just needed to be sure you understood what you were getting into with our family. I'm getting into a lifetime with the man I love, Rosa replied simply. Everything else is just details. Eleanor nodded, seeming satisfied. You'll do for him, I think. It wasn't effusive approval, but it was enough. As Rosa prepared to leave, Eleanor stopped her at the door, disappearing briefly before returning with a small velvet box. "This was mine," she said, opening it to reveal a delicate silver hair comb adorned with small pearls and sapphires. Something borrowed and something blue, if you'd like. Rosa touched the antique piece gently, understanding the significance of the gesture. "I would be honored, Mrs. Love." "Eleanor," the older woman corrected. "If you're to be family, you might as well use my name." Rosa left feeling lighter, ready to become part of David's family, quirks, critiques, and all. That evening, when David returned from a final meeting with the officiant, Rosa was waiting on his porch swing, a bottle of wine already opened. "What's the occasion?" he asked, settling beside her. "I visited your grandmother today," she replied, handing him a glass. David nearly spilled his wine. "You did what? Alone, without backup or protective gear?" "I wanted to clear the air before the wedding." "And? Do I need to start looking for a new grandmother or a new fiancée?" Rosa laughed, nudging him with her shoulder. "Neither. I think we understand each other now." She described their conversation, watching his expression shift from concern to relief. "She gave you her grandmother's." "A hair comb?" he asked, amazed. "She wouldn't even let my mother wear that at her wedding." "I think it was her way of saying I'm accepted." David pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I told you she'd come around." "Yes, you're very wise," Rosa teased. "Now, help me decide where to use it. My hair will be up on the right side, so I'm thinking—" As the wedding day approached, the entire town seemed to be involved in preparations in one way or another. Mrs. Henderson created elaborate floral arrangements of yellow daisies and sea lavender. The local bakery designed a cake topped with an edible sculpture of the town's lighthouse. Even Mr. Harold, who had unwittingly read David's love letter months ago, offered his prized collection of antique lanterns to light the reception path. "I feel like I'm marrying the whole town," Rosa joked one evening as they reviewed the growing list of well-wishers who had contributed something to their celebration. "In a way, you are," David replied, kissing her forehead. "This place is part of who I am, and now it's becoming part of our story together." The night before their wedding, Rosa stood alone on the beach where they would exchange vows, watching. Waves rolled gently to shore under a canopy of stars. Tomorrow, this same stretch of sand would be transformed with an archway of driftwood and flowers, rows of white chairs, and a woven runner leading to the spot where she and David would pledge their lives to each other. She closed her eyes, breathing in the salt air, letting the sound of the waves center her. Despite all the planning and preparation, despite the approval finally gained from Eleanor, a flutter of nerves danced in her stomach. Not about marrying David, never that, but about the significance of the step they were taking, the lifetime they were committing to build together. "Nervous!" came a voice behind her, and she turned to find David approaching, silhouetted against the distant lights of town. "I thought it was bad luck to see the bride before the wedding," she said, but leaned into his embrace as he wrapped his arms around her from behind. "I'll risk it," he murmured against her hair. "I missed you." They had agreed to spend the night apart, following tradition at the insistence of David's mother. Rosa had been staying with Lily, her maid of honor, while David remained at his cottage. "Are you worried I'll fall into the ocean during our vows?" he asked, only half joking. "Or that some disaster will ruin our perfect day?" Rosa turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw with tender fingers. "Nothing could ruin tomorrow," she said softly. because no matter what happens, at the end of the day, we'll be married. And that's all that matters. They stayed like that for a while, wrapped in each other's arms, with the sound of waves providing a rhythmic accompaniment to their beating hearts. When they finally parted with a lingering kiss, both felt a sense of peaceful certainty. Whatever tomorrow brought, perfect ceremony or chaotic mishap, it was merely the beginning of their journey together. Morning dawned clear and beautiful, as if nature itself blessed their union. Rosa awoke to sunshine streaming through the windows and the distant call of seagulls. Today was the day. Today she would marry the man she loved, the man who had stumbled into her heart with all his endearing imperfections. As Lily helped her into her dress, an ethereal creation of flowing silk that seemed to capture the essence of the ocean in its subtle blue-white hue, Rosa felt a profound sense of rightness. This was exactly where she was meant to be, exactly who she was meant to love. She touched Eleanor's hair comb, now carefully placed among her dark waves, and smiled at her reflection. The woman in the mirror looked happy, confident, ready, not for a perfect wedding, but for a real marriage with all its future joys and challenges. "You look stunning," Lily said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "David might actually faint when he sees you." Rosa laughed, touching the sea-glass pendant that still hung around her neck, her something blue, and a reminder of the moment their relationship had truly begun to shift from friendship to something deeper. "As long as he doesn't fall into the ocean, we'll count it as a success." Meanwhile, David stood before the mirror in his cottage, adjusting his tie for the 10th time. His best man, Thomas, watched with amusement. "You look fine," Thomas assured him. "Rosa won't care if your tie is perfectly straight or not." "I know," David replied, taking a deep breath. "I just want today to be perfect for her." Thomas laughed, clapping his friend on the shoulder. "Perfect might be a stretch, given your track record. But somehow I think Rosa prefers your version. Of romance, anyway." David smiled, remembering Rosa's words in the fountain. Perhaps Thomas was right. Perhaps their love had never been about perfection, but about finding beauty in the unexpected, joy in the chaotic, and connection in the most improbable moments. "Ready?" Thomas asked, checking his watch. David nodded, a sense of calm settling over him. "More than ready. It's time to marry the woman of my dreams, preferably without falling into anything this time." Thomas grinned, picking up the small velvet box containing Rosa's wedding ring. "No promises, but I'll do my best to keep you upright. Now come on, don't want to keep your bride waiting." And with that, they headed for the beach, where their friends and family had gathered, where the ocean stretched endlessly beneath a perfect blue sky, where Rosa would soon walk toward him to begin their life together. David's heart felt full, to bursting as he took his place beneath the driftwood arch, waiting for the moment when they would finally become husband and wife. The wedding day arrived, grand and perfect despite its simplicity. The beach was decorated with shells and wildflowers. The waves provided a rhythmic soundtrack as guests gathered on white chairs arranged in the sand. A gentle breeze carried the scent of salt and jasmine, nature's own perfume for the occasion. Rosa looked breathtaking in white, her dress catching the breeze as she walked toward David, whose deep blue eyes sparkled with happiness and unshed tears. When she reached him and their hands joined, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, despite the crowd of witnesses. Their friends and family watched with joy as they prepared to exchange vows, the love between them palpable, in the air like electricity before a storm. The officiant, a longtime friend of the Love family, smiled warmly as she began the ceremony. The words flowed over them, ancient promises made new again by their genuine intention, their shared commitment to a future together, regardless of what challenges might come. When they exchanged rings, David's hands remarkably steady as he slipped the band onto Rosa's finger. The moment felt sacred, transcendent. They had written their own vows, and David spoke his with an eloquence that surprised even those who knew him well, finding perfect words at last when it mattered most. Rosa's response was equally moving, her artist's sensibility painting verbal pictures of the life they would build together. The officiant moved through the traditional elements of the ceremony with grace, finally arriving at the point many had been anticipating with a mixture of dread and amusement, given David's history of ill-timed disasters. "If anyone knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in matrimony," she said, "speak now or forever hold your peace." A brief, customary pause followed, the only sound the gentle wash of waves against the shore, and then, "I object!" The voice rang out clear and firm, silencing even the seagulls that had been circling overhead. A collective gasp rose from the assembled guests. David turned, fury replacing the joy on his face in an instant, only to see his own grandmother, standing up, her elegant hat slightly askew with the force of her objection. "Grandma!" he cried, mortified. "Not again! Not another disaster on the most important day of his life!" "David," the old woman huffed, straightening her hat with dignity, "are you absolutely sure you want to marry Rosa?" A hush fell over the gathering. Rosa's heart pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird. After their conversation, after the approval she thought she'd finally earned, had Eleanor changed her mind? Had she decided in the final moment that an artist with no family connections and modest means wasn't worthy of the love name after all? "Yes, Grandma," David said firmly, taking Rosa's hand in his and squeezing it reassuringly. "I love her more than anything." His grandmother's stern face suddenly broke into a wide smile, transforming her features from intimidating to almost impish. "Good. I just wanted to make sure. Now hurry up and kiss your bride before I get bored." Laughter filled the air, nervous tension releasing like a wave receding from shore. David's mother leaned over to whisper to Rosa, loud enough for those in nearby rows to hear. "She did the same thing at my wedding. It's her way of giving her blessing, making sure you're truly committed before she fully welcomes you to the family." "A love family tradition?" someone called from the back rows. "The worst one," David's father responded with good-natured exasperation, "but we can't seem to break her of it." The ceremony continued, somehow more meaningful for having weathered this final unexpected hurdle. When David and Rosa were pronounced husband and wife, he didn't wait for permission to kiss his bride. He pulled her into his arms and kissed. Her deepliest cheers erupted around them, the sound mingling with the crash of a particularly enthusiastic wave against the shore. The reception was held on the beach as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, bathing everything in golden light. Tables draped in white linen were adorned with lanterns and wildflowers. A wooden dance floor had been constructed directly on the sand, and twinkling lights hung from poles, creating a canopy of stars above the celebration. David and Rosa moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes. The entire town seemed to have turned out for the occasion, each person with a story about the couple's courtship, from Harold's dramatic reading of the misdirected love letter to the infamous festival incident with the mayor and the bouquet of daisies. "You two have provided us with enough entertainment to last a lifetime," the mayor said good-naturedly, having long since forgiven the flower incident. "I can't wait to see what happens next." As the evening progressed, David and Rosa shared their first dance as husband and wife. He led her gracefully across the floor, not a stumble or misstep to be found. "Look at you," Rosa murmured, impressed. "Not a single disaster." "I've been practicing," David confessed. I wanted at least one perfect moment today. And here I was, looking forward to being dipped into the cake, she teased, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Later, at the reception, the grandmother approached Rosa with a small, ornate box. "This belonged to David's grandfather," she said, opening it to reveal an antique sapphire bracelet that caught the fading light in brilliant blue flashes. He was clumsy too, always breaking things, always putting his foot in his mouth, but he loved me perfectly for 62 years. She clasped it around Rosa's wrist with surprisingly nimble fingers. "Welcome to the family, my dear. Take care." "Of my grandson," Rosa embraced the older woman, tears in her eyes. "I will, I promise." As night fell completely, the party continued under the stars. Bonfires were lit along the beach, casting warm light over the celebration. Rosa and David slipped away from the revelry, walking hand in hand along the shoreline, where the waves left gleaming trails in the moonlight. "Mrs. Love," David said, testing the name on his tongue, "has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Rosa laughed, leaning against him. "I think it suits me perfectly. Though I'm keeping Parks for my professional name, I've built a reputation for my art." "Rosa Parks, love," David mused. "Even better. It tells our whole story in 3 words. They stopped walking, turning to face each other, with the moon silvering the waves behind them. David cupped Rosa's face in his hands, looking at her with such tenderness it made her heart ache. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For saying yes. For loving me despite all my disasters. For turning my life into an adventure I never want to end." Rosa stood on tiptoe, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that held promise of all the years to come. "The adventure is just beginning," she whispered against his mouth. And as they returned to their wedding celebration, hands linked and hearts full, both knew that whatever the future held, whatever mishaps or miracles awaited them, they would face it together, turning even the most chaotic moments into memories to treasure. That night, as husband and wife, they finally had a moment. Alone in the beachside cottage they had rented for their honeymoon. No failed proposals, no interruptions, just them. The cottage was simple but beautiful. Wide windows overlooking the moonlit ocean, a 4-poster bed adorned with flowers, candles casting golden light across the room. The sound of waves breaking against the shore filtered through. Partially open windows, nature's lullaby accompanying their first night as a married couple. Rosa stood by the window, removing the pins from her hair one by one until it cascaded down her back in dark waves that caught the moonlight. She had changed from her wedding dress into a simple silk nightgown, its pale blue color reminiscent of the sea glass pendant that still hung around her neck. David watched her from across the room, jacket discarded, tie loosened, his deep blue eyes reflecting the candlelight as they traced the silhouette of his bride against the backdrop of stars and ocean. "My wife," he said softly, the words still new and wonderful on his tongue. She turned to him, the moonlight illuminating her profile, and his breath caught at the sight. She walked to him with deliberate steps, barefoot now, and placed her hands on his chest. "My husband," she replied, feeling his heart race beneath her fingertips. David traced his fingers along Rosa's skin, from her shoulder down her arm, his deep blue eyes filled with love and hunger. "After everything, I'm still in shock." "You said yes," Rosa smiled, running her hands through his hair, enjoying the freedom to touch him whenever she wanted, to claim him as hers before the world. "You might be terrible at proposals, David, but you're perfect in every other way." He kissed her then, slowly at first, then with increasing passion. His hands caressed her back, her waist, pulling her closer until there was no space between them. Rosa responded with equal fervor, all the love and desire she felt for this man expressed in the way she held him. the soft sound she made as his lips moved to her neck. They moved to the bed, shedding what remained of their formal clothes. Along the way, every touch a promise, every kiss a vow renewed. David looked at her with such reverence it brought tears to her eyes. "I have loved you from the moment I saw you," he whispered against her skin. "Every clumsy attempt, every disaster, they were all because you make me forget how to think clearly." "I wouldn't have you any other way," she replied, pulling him closer. Their bodies moved together in perfect harmony, finding a rhythm as natural as the waves outside their window. In these moments, there was no awkwardness, no hesitation, just two people completely in tune with each other's desires, completely committed to each other's pleasure. David's hands, which so often fumbled in everyday life, moved with confident precision across Rosa's body, knowing exactly where to touch, how to caress, when to linger. And Rosa, always bold and direct, showed him without words exactly what she wanted, guiding him with gentle hands and responsive sighs. The moonlight bathed them in silver as they explored each other with unhurried devotion. There was no rush, no world beyond the walls of their cottage, no time except the eternal present of their connection. They had waited for this night through months of growing intimacy, and now they savored every moment, every sensation. "I love you," Rosa whispered. As they moved together, the words both a declaration and a prayer. "I love you, David." "And I love you," he replied, his voice husky with emotion, "more than I ever thought possible." As the night deepened, their love burned brighter than ever, passionate, raw, and beautifully unstoppable. The sound of the waves outside provided a rhythm to their movements. The moonlight bathed their intertwined forms in silver. This was no disaster, no fumbled attempt. This was perfection in its most honest form. Two souls completely vulnerable, completely connected, completely in love. Afterward, they lay tangled in sheets, Rosa's head on David's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. His fingers traced lazy patterns along her bare shoulder, and she sighed with contentment. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, dropping a kiss on the top of her head. "How perfectly imperfect today was," she replied. "Your grandmother's objection, the seagull that tried to eat our cake, the moment the wind caught my veil and nearly sent it to sea." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "And how I wouldn't change a single thing," David smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Not even when I almost dropped the ring in the sand?" "Especially not that," she laughed. "The look of panic on your face was priceless. And the way you dove to catch it before it disappeared forever, very heroic. I think I swallowed about a pound of sand," he admitted. "Worth it, though." He pulled her back into his arms, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him, as if they had been designed as two halves of a whole. "I promise our life together won't be boring." "I'm counting on it," Rosa murmured, her eyes drifting closed, as exhaustion from the day's events began to claim her. Outside, the moon traced a silver path across the water, leading toward the horizon and whatever adventures awaited them there. Inside, two people who had found each other despite all odds slept in perfect contentment, their breaths synchronized, their hearts beating as one. David's last conscious thought before joining Rosa in sleep was one of profound gratitude for all the mishaps that had eventually led him here, for Rosa's ability to find charm in his disasters rather than annoyance, for the lifetime of love that stretched before them now, rich with possibility. The candles burned low, their flames casting dancing shadows across the walls of the cottage. Even in sleep, David held Rosa close, as if afraid she might disappear if he loosened his embrace. And Rosa, who had always valued her independence, found herself nestling closer to him, drawn to his warmth, his steadiness, his love. Their wedding night unlike so many other significant moments in their relationship, unfolded without a single mishap or interruption, as if the universe had decided to grant them this one perfect evening before resuming its usual pattern of delightful chaos. It was a gentle beginning to their married life, a moment of calm before the adventure continued. And what an adventure it would be, full of laughter and tears, triumphs and challenges, moments of breathtaking beauty, and, knowing David, the occasional spectacular disaster. But they would face it all together, their love stronger for being tested, more precious for being hard-won, more enduring for being based on acceptance of each other's truest selves. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky in delicate shades of pink and gold, they slept on, wrapped in each other's arms, wrapped in love, wrapped in the certainty that they had found at last where they truly belonged. Morning found them tangled in sheets, Rosa's head on David's chest, his arm wrapped protectively around her. Sunlight streamed through the windows, turning her hair to mahogany silk, highlighting the contentment on his sleeping face. Rosa woke first, watching her husband's peaceful expression, marveling at how they had found each other despite, or perhaps because of, all the mishaps along the way. She traced the line of his jaw with gentle fingers, still somewhat in awe that this man was now her husband. When David opened his eyes and found her watching him, he smiled sleepily. "Good morning, Mrs. Love." The name sent a thrill through her. "Good morning, husband," she replied, pressing a kiss to his chest, right above his heart. "No disasters yet," he observed, pulling her closer. "Maybe our luck is changing." As if on cue, they heard a crash from the kitchen, followed by an apologetic meow. They had forgotten about the cottage's resident cat, who had apparently knocked over something breakable. They looked at each other and burst into laughter. "Or maybe not," Rosa giggled, burying her face in his shoulder. "Would you have it any other way?" David asked, his eyes twinkling with mirth and love. Rosa shook her head, her expression growing serious. "No, because perfect is boring, remember? I prefer our kind of love, unpredictable and real." As the years passed, their love continued to grow and evolve. They welcomed children who inherited Rosa's artistic talent and David's propensity for mishaps. They weathered storms, both metaphorical and literal, supported each other through losses, and celebrated triumphs together. They built a life filled with purpose, passion, and an abundance of laughter. And on their 50th anniversary, when they returned to the same beach where they had wed, surrounded now by children, grandchildren, and a lifetime of memories, David still looked at Rosa with the same wonder he had shown on their wedding day. "Was it everything you hoped for?" he asked her as they watched the sunset together, their hands still fitting perfectly together despite the passage of time. Rosa smiled, the laugh lines around her eyes deepening. "More, so much more than I ever dreamed possible." Theirs was not a perfect love story in the conventional sense. It was messy and awkward and full of false starts and unexpected turns. But as David pulled her close, his deep blue eyes promising a love that had only deepened with each passing year, Rosa knew it was the only kind of love story she could have wanted. One that was uniquely, beautifully theirs. A love that was always meant to be.